I wanted us to be the best team in Notion EMEA at using Notion.
This is Ciarán Doyle, the head of solutions engineering at Notion EMEA, and he's about to share some insider secrets on how to use Notion.
The only way that you can get improvement is by change. You cannot improve by doing the same thing the same way.
Ciarán helps some of Europe's largest companies and enterprises adopt Notion at scale.
A beautiful Notion page that doesn't help is useless. And I would much rather something simple that is impactful.
Which makes him the perfect person to talk about how to adopt Notion, where to put your priorities, and, most importantly, what traps you should avoid. So in this episode you'll learn the problem most companies struggle with when they try to adopt Notion.
And all of a sudden, the structure starts to fall apart.
The one thing every company should implement in Notion
is the most transformative thing that you can do in Notion for a company.
An often overlooked but super important step when you try to roll out Notion in your organization.
That step is often really quick in implementations, but it shouldn't be.
And a simple yet effective trick that you should use before doing anything in Notion.
Regardless of if it's you wanting to change how you use Notion personally or the largest enterprises in the world, it's the best place to start.
So what would you say is your 2-minute elevator life pitch?
Yeah, sure thing. So I have the business and the personal side of that life pitch. So from the personal side, living in Dublin with my wife, our dog and our 5-month-old baby. So that takes up pretty much all of my spare time. That's not Notion at the moment, just keeping a little one alive. In terms of professional, similar to yourself, I had like an unusual route into technology, not the most kind of straightforward path. I'm actually qualified as an environmental scientist. I had grand ambitions of making the world a better place, and came out of university at the very beginning of the financial crash in the mid 2000s, and it didn't turn out there weren't a lot of companies willing to pay for people who wanted to help save the world. Unfortunately, it's not the way it was back then. I think it's gotten a lot better now. But to invite part of my degree, I learned to program in a language called OR, which is a statistical package. And I was at the time living in London, and there was a niche in consultancy for that particular skill. So I ended up working in the IBM ecosystem, doing implementation for 4 years in London. It was an amazing time to be in London. It was around the time of the 2012 Olympics. It was very great atmosphere around the place, and it was a really interesting time to be working with IBM products, because it was really at that point where enterprises were transitioning from on-prem to cloud, and really starting to take it seriously. Like, cloud had been around for quite a long time, like Salesforce and NetSuite. But really, like, the large enterprise was starting to take it very seriously. So that was really interesting to me. And then I had the opportunity to join Oracle a couple of years later. And they were really going all in on cloud at the time. Larry Ellison, the founder and now CTO of Oracle, was like really pushing cloud. And based on what I was seeing, that was just really, really exciting. And I had that was where I was introduced to solution engineering, which I'll get onto in a minute. And that was just like the most wonderful place to work and learn. I was surrounded by incredible solution engineers, incredible people. I spent almost 4 years there, and the opportunity came up to be the first solution engineer in Dublin at Slack. And Slack I felt like one of those technologies where the groundswell was behind it. And I was proven quite luckily right. It was one of those transformative technologies. I had the most incredible time there. Got to build a team. I got to work with so many amazing customers. Really, really fortunate. And then I had the opportunity, just over a year ago, I celebrated my year anniversary at Notion at the beginning of June, to come to this.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So it's absolutely flown. But I had the opportunity to come here, and I'm sure I'll get on to why Notion in a while, but it was just, it had that same feeling. It was that balance between the head and the heart that I had at Slack. Notion had that same feeling. So I know I've gone over a little bit over 2 minutes there, but hopefully that's a view on the personal and the professional.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I would love us to talk a bit more about Slack today. I think we're mostly about focus about Notion, but maybe it's one other day I'll get some insights, show you how to set up Slack the perfect way. But yeah,
I'm a little bit rusty now, but I'm sure there's one or two things that we can share.
Yeah, probably a lot more than I know about it. But yeah, you mentioned solutions engineering. And before I actually looked, like when I first met you and you mentioned you're a solutions engineer, afterwards I looked up what it actually means because I had no idea what a solution engineer does. So maybe you could just quickly explain, what is that job profile? What does it entail?
A solution engineer, I like to say, is the best job that no one's ever heard of. So I get it's an incredible job. You get to work. Essentially, you sit in between three kind of pillars. You sit between the product team, the sales team, and the customer. So if you imagine a triangle, we're right in the middle. And we get to essentially work with all of those groups of people to best utilize the product that we work with. And that involves lots of things. So it will be big, deep customer workshops where we're figuring out use cases and, going old school, getting Post-its on a whiteboard and journey mapping together and then building that out in Notion or any product really. It's demonstrations, it's presenting at events. It's also less glamorous stuff like, going and working with our product team on, the nuance of an integration. So, Notion, we have tons of integrations with lots of different platforms. How our customers want to use them. It can be slightly different. We're very fortunate in that we're talking to those customers all the time. So we might want to go and make some enhancements on particular things. And we would work with our product team there. And then we also work with our sales team because we are working with customers all the time. So I always like to think of a customer buying Notion has to make 4 decisions. So they have to make a commercial decision. The thing that they have the money, they're willing to pay for the product that it is. There has to be a value decision in that obviously it needs to, do something that they really, really need or it's not doing right now or they can't do right now. They have to make a legal decision in that they have to sign a contract and they have to make a security decision. They want the data to flow in a certain way. The solution engineer really helps with everything except for the legal. We help with the value. If we do a good job with the value, that helps with the commercial. We help with the security. We tend to be subject matter experts in, how I would say what I would call customer trust. We tend to touch a lot of different parts of sales processes, existing customers, product enhancements, and I said events. So that's why I say it's the best job that nobody's ever heard of because you get to do so much. You get to use different parts of your brain. You get to be creative. It's a very exciting field within software to work.
It sounds like a super cool mix of A, skills and B, the activities, right? Like this combination role. So I'm glad I learned about solutions engineering. I'll definitely keep an eye on these roles. And but that all relies, right? Like that was like the general way of what you do, and now you do that specifically for Notion. And just the same way, some people have never heard of solutions engineering. A lot of people also still haven't heard of Notion, right? So if you come home to a family dinner, like a bigger gathering, and someone asks you, what do you do? And you say like, well, okay, I'm a solutions engineer at Notion. They're like, well, Notion? what is that? Like, how would you usually try to explain what Notion is all about?
Yeah, that conversation happens so frequently. So I feel like if I'm at a family do and I'm talking to my younger cousins in their 20s and teens, they all know Notion. And they all think oh, it's so cool you work there. And I talk to any auntie or uncle and they like, why don't you work with IBM anymore? So
that was a proper company.
I know that company. It's really interesting and really funny. What I tend to do is I like if I'm explaining it to somebody who doesn't know Notion, who is in some way IT literate, what I'll do is I'll get them to take out their phone, and I'll just kind of say you have your Notes app, and they take out their Notes app, and then I'll say, but you also probably have a to-do app as well, right? and you that type of like something that you might be using to like a third app you're probably using for meal planning, and then you'll have something that you have your calendar. Well, Notion actually takes all of those things and condenses it into one place. So not only do you not have to think where something is, but you also get the advantage of they're all connected. So the going shopping item on your to-do list or in your calendar is directly connected to that meal plan that you have. So all the ingredients are there. That kind of connectivity just reduces stress in life, and that's a good thing. And if you can imagine that in your personal life, it's the exact same for your work life. You probably have 5 or 6 applications that you use regularly to store knowledge or to utilize knowledge, or to interact between knowledge and time. And Notion is the kind of place where all of that should sit, and it just makes your life far less stressful. So yeah, that's tends to be my like method for explaining what Notion is to family members or people you might meet in a bar or whatever. I'm curious, Matthias, how do you do it?
It's a good question. I'm struggling with it, right? That's why I ask everyone what is your secret? I tend to go with the when it's like more from a business perspective, that it's sort of this like all in the central hub for your activities, right? Notion doesn't necessarily have to do everything that you need to do on a daily basis, but it can be that starting point for all activities, right? So it's sort of becomes this command center is a loaded word, but like it's the central point. So whenever you start anything, you start from here, right? So no matter whether you're looking for a document, whether you're trying to do some work, whether you're looking up something, right? Like you have one single starting point, and that removes so many decisions. It's like it's a tool that helps remove other decisions, because you don't need to think about it could be there, it could be here, 10 different windows. Now it's like it reduces this multitasking on in your digital work life. That's like currently what I try to do, but I feel like it's still not quite there. I like the value proposition that you have in yours, right? Like with the stress, I feel like that is very, very tangible and
I think mine is different from yours in that I'm maybe focused on a user rather than a business. Certainly when I'm talking to businesses, I take a very similar tack to you. So I would think about a business, no matter what the entity is in a business. And you might remember this from when we met in Berlin, talking about like the different spheres of influence within a business, the individual, the team, or even like the department or business wide. Those entities all have different types of knowledge that they store, and that can take the form of very structured knowledge like project management, tasks, OKRs, even your own personal calendar. That is structured knowledge. But then there's also unstructured knowledge, meeting notes, brainstorming sessions, all these kind of things. Notion is a great place for both of those to interact and for the unstructured to become structured, or for the structured to benefit from the unstructured. And I feel like it's such a tactile product, pitching it is hard. Showing people and getting them in it, they see it so clearly then. I remember the first time seeing relational databases work. And, that just sounds intimidating, doesn't it? Relational databases. It's I don't like, somebody's thinking like databases, that's Oracle stuff. Like that's scary. I don't want to go near that. But like relational databases will transform any business if you put them in there. Every team would improve by having a company-wide central database and then being able to create relations for their own personal teams. Like, so powerful. So when I saw that, when I tried to explain that, it's really difficult. When I show it, people love it.
I agree. And I think actually that's like Notion's biggest contribution to the whole productivity or a workplace suite, both on for the personal use cases and for the business use cases, is like this democratization of database, right? Like making databases accessible to non-engineers. Before I did, like a few small like web development calls, I had no idea what SQL is, right? These sort of things. But if you play around with the Notion database long enough, you start to develop like sort of like an intuitive understanding. It makes it sometimes a bit harder because as a non-technical user, you look at it and it looks like a spreadsheet and it does some weird things that like figuring out what the difference between spreadsheet and databases can be a bit tough. But again, you learn by trying and using it, and then later when you learn the fundamentals of what actually is behind it, and you're like, this makes a lot of sense, and it's like so accessible and so approachable through this interface. So I think that's actually like probably the biggest contribution that Notion has had, the biggest impact on the whole space.
Yeah, I actually, before we move on, I owe you a big thank you, because there's something that you said, I think it was in Berlin when we were presenting at the same event, where you were discussing the difference between databases and spreadsheets. And you just conceptually were just had a database up on the screen behind you, and you said the difference is spreadsheets work across and down, databases work across. And it's just such an easy phrase for people to actually go, okay, so now I'm actually thinking about something that's actually 3D. There's depth here rather than a flat spreadsheet. And that just really helped me when I'm articulating to customers to just get them to take that first step. So I owe you a big thank you for that.
I'm glad to hear that. Like I remember that. Yeah, that was, I think, like a post-lunch session where I talked for like 30 minutes on formula. So like, my apologies to everyone in the room there who had to sit through that like right after a good lunch. But it was a really fun event.
I loved it. I love formulas, so I loved it.
Yeah, me too. But speaking of formulas and databases is I think a perfect segue to the next question, because it's about like what do you see people most commonly struggle with when it comes to Notion? Like database and formulas are certainly like two maybe like easy feature things, but maybe you have like more of a like meta answer to that, like in the sense of what do you see?
Yeah, so there are definitely some technical things that I see people struggle with. Let me give you two answers. So one is maybe a little bit meta, and the other is what tends to happen with a company starting out with Notion is that one person uses Notion in their personal life, and they're using a tool that's not quite good enough, or maybe they're using 3 tools when they could be using one. And that person says, I use this thing in my personal life. I think it will be perfect here. Can we try it as a team? And that team start using it, and they probably have really good structure because that person who brought it in owns it, is passionate about it, wants to make it successful. And then the project that team is working on grows, and another team come in, and another team come in, and all of a sudden, the structure starts to fall apart because nobody is responsible for it. And that, I would say, is the number one thing that I see people struggle with is their Notion workspace does not have a plan. They don't have team space structures. They don't have that centralized database and the relations built out that I was talking about. And that leads to the benefit of Notion actually getting eroded a little bit. So that's, where my team and some of the other teams here in the Dublin office and globally come in, where we try and like build those structures, build those best practices from day one, build amazing team space hierarchies and workspace designs. Because if you do that, just the value you get, it doesn't just go up a little, it shoots up. The other one that's maybe a little bit more meta is change. When you go, so when I came here first, Slack had been bought by Salesforce maybe 18 months. No, we'd been bought maybe 2.5 years, but had been a Salesforce company for about 18 months. And Salesforce is a huge company, 80,000 people, all very, very good at what they do, but it's also quite a competitive place. And the idea that you would put your meeting notes in a public space for all to see, in these big companies is quite a change. And a lot of us have worked in those big companies. So we get that. We have that kind of way of thinking built into us. This is for me. This is for my team. And all of a sudden moving to Notion, where apart from like maybe a one-to-one with your manager about your career or maybe some HR conversations, like everything's open. That is a huge mental shift to make, but the value that it unlocks is huge, because I can use Notion Q&A to ask a question, and I'm not just searching my notes, I'm searching everyone's notes. So I am so much better at work because of that. And like, that sounds obvious, but getting people to go, I am shifting from private first to public first with my note taking, with my team's notes, with our team meetings, with our tasks, our projects. That requires a big shift. That is change management. That's the kind of stuff that traditionally like McKinsey or BCG get paid millions and millions for. And, you know, we're trying to do that with Notion and bring that change. That's the kind of thing that I think a lot of people struggle with, is when you all of a sudden have to really truly benefit from this product to its full potential, require that shift in work and the way you think about privacy at work. That's really interesting, having those conversations. And I suppose I look after all of Europe, and it's really interesting to see regional dynamics at play as well. So like in the Nordics, for example, that's a very normal thing, and they're very comfortable with that. Whereas maybe in Southern Europe, that's less of a cultural norm, and it requires a little bit more coaching and stuff. So it's really interesting actually just to even see within our kind of European region the different kind of cultural dynamics at play.
Yeah, so many good points in there. Like I see a lot of the same patterns, both like the growth perspective, right? Like I think it's one of Notion's strength that it like sort of like spreads very organically in companies, but you really notice the saying, you know, like what brought you here won't get you there with these things. Correct. Like what things that work well for an individual, because, you know, you can just like, you know, cover the cracks and you're still like one human on the other end who knows a lot of things. You can, you know, like the system is fairly forgiving. And also if you have like a small team with 2-3 people that work with the product, and everyone can just maybe in the same room or like talks to each other on a regular basis, still fine. But the second, right, you crank things up and you add like 5, 15 or 50 people into the mix, they're very, very different challenges. And you notice it only when it then, you know, becomes a bit more chaotic and things start getting lost again, and all of a sudden you feel again like, okay, this is now in a similar position as I was, you know, like 1 year ago when I had like a combination of G Drive, Google Docs, like, you know, I have documents everywhere, I don't really know where to find it, and it's because you don't have the foundation in place, right, to help you later down the line. But I'd like to also like maybe go a bit further into the change management perspective, because I think that's such an underrated discussion about Notion, in particular like Notion and B2B. Like my job title says like Notion consultant, blah, blah, blah. Actually, like I think like at least 50% of the job is helping teams change and adapt to that new tool. So I would be really, really curious to hear if you say, you know, like it's a big part of the conversations you have, like what are your, you know, some angles or like some you know ways that you've seen work well with teams to help them adopt to more transparency, and then B also in general, right, like when it comes to adopting a new tool with a somewhat steep learning curve, in particular in the beginning.
So to answer part A, I think that there are I don't think carrot and stick works in this situation. I think it has to be all carrot. People need to see what's in this. If you're asking somebody to change the way they work, they need to see benefit in it. Otherwise, they will revert back to their previous way of working. So what we tend to do is try and find 2 or 3 like solid use cases that a customer has. And what we'll do is we'll go over to their office, or we'll jump on a virtual meeting room for a couple of hours. We'll speak to tons of people. We'll ask them what they do every day. It's when we're having these conversations, we do not mention Notion. It actually helps more if they don't know anything about Notion, and they talk us through what they do every day. What are the bottlenecks? What works well? Who are their direct reports? Who are their stakeholders? What are their timelines like, etc. And by being able to piece that together, we can almost, you know, if you do that with 10 people, you can build a pretty good knowledge map of a company. Then it's our job to go away, build that out in Notion, present it back to the customer, and all of a sudden, that enterprise is now seeing, you know, a transformation in how they work, and a tangible benefit, because the bottlenecks that they spoke about, or the deadlines that they were missing, they're no longer at risk of being missed, or the bottlenecks have been smoothed out. I find this approach works really well, because it's listening to the customer, it's trusting that they know their business better than anybody else, and it's trying to help. What I find doesn't work is trying to come in with a very strict, this is Notion, this is how you're going to use it, off you go. Because you're showing no trust, you're showing no empathy, you're saying that you know their business better than they do. And all of a sudden they're going to, try it for a week, and then it's going to fall away and it's going to become shelfware. And that doesn't work for us. We sell on a license per year model. We want to make sure the most important thing for us is that people find huge value from it, and they want to bring more people in. That's how we continue to grow. So that would be the answer for like the part A of the question. I'm sorry, I've forgotten what part B was.
No, part B, good question. Let's revert back to part A was that part with the implementation. I think part B was about the like the steep learning curve, right? Like Notion as from more the technical side. Whether you have any, maybe from some success stories with other companies or like things that you've seen work well in order to board on the group that is not the Notion champion, right? That is not the person who in their free time builds for hours in the system and knows everything in and out.
Completely. So I had a very interesting experience in this when I first started at Notion. We were working with a large European TV company. And we went on site to do a workshop. And I was brand new in the job, trying to flex a little bit, trying to show my value. And I was sitting beside somebody who had been in this company for 30 years. And they, I was just kind of showing them one or two things on Notion. And I just kind of started a new line and indented with the tab key. And they said, "Oh, stop. Show me that again. How did you do that?" And I was like, "Oh, it's just a tab." And they're like, "But that's like 10 spaces in one." And I was like, yeah. And it just dawned on me that for some people that we're working with, the journey isn't just Notion. It's, in general, this new language that, everybody younger than them in the company speaks. And that was really important for me just to understand, right, there are layers to this, and this is not just bringing one person on board. This is our one type of persona on board. So what we would tend to try and do is build a hierarchy of users. So at the top, you want the sponsor, the person who's brought this in, who is responsible for this and has tied it to something strategic for an organization. Below that, we want a kind of smaller group that we would call like our admins. These are going to be people responsible for administering Notion, whether that's connecting it into things like a single sign-on provider, or making sure that we have like really strong rules around guests, or good team space management, etc. And they're kind of like the people who will be getting a lot of face time with the Notion team. And then next we have the most critical layer, and that is the champion network. And they are like, they're the trainers who are going to train everybody else. So they are let's say we had a 400 person Notion implementation. They're the 20 to 30 people that we are going to incentivize and reward with lots of like Notion training, Notion enablement, really going in deep on their use cases with the idea that these will be really influential people, and they'll bring that back to the business. And they will train the trainer. They will be, they'll be the ones who will actually show everybody in the company how to get Notion. So that step is often really quick in implementations, but it shouldn't be. That needs to be something that we take time on. That we pick the right people. If you get like the person in your if you got that person in your team who's going to like build beautiful databases, and I don't say that as a joke, I really mean build beautiful databases, and take care about like how our team spaces look, and understand formulas and buttons and all these types of things. If you get those right type of people and you motivate them correctly, your implementation is going to be incredibly successful. If you just pick 30 people off a list, it's not going to work as well for you. You might get lucky, but most of the time it won't work. So I think, and then after that, then you have your main users. And there should be a methodology for those main users to be able to like become champions, but also for them to be able to provide feedback in a really clear way, and there should be opportunities for like one-to-many type enablements and things like that. But yeah, I think that when you get that hierarchy working well, and you have regular meeting cadences with that hierarchy, your opportunity for a really successful Notion implementation that helps the customer, that achieves the strategic goal of that sponsor at the top, is going to be so much higher.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like, it touches on another part that I think like people sometimes tend to forget when they get very excited in the beginning about Notion and just want to roll it out quickly to the company, is that it's not like a set it and forget it thing, right? Like no tool is like, you neither tools nor methodologies, where you can't just like, throw them into the company and then expect them to like sort of self-organize. There's a reason why companies have IT teams, right? That whose whole responsibility is to just keep like the back end running. And Notion needs to be treated in the same way, with maybe the special part that is like much closer to operations than a lot of the other IT solutions. So it's like usually you have this like hybrid role of a person, right, who needs to on the one hand do the technical stuff and like administer and like set up things, but also then needs to know exactly, okay, this is how the operations work. And then that, in particular in bigger companies, right, that someone will have to have that as a role assigned to them. Maybe not full-time, depends on the size of the company, right? If you're a smaller team, you can get away with someone doing that part-time. But with like 400 people, you need one or maybe like two people, right, like whose sole job is to just administer that, or else you'll have this like one-time boon, and then like over time, right, like all systems move towards chaos and you need to constantly try to fight back there. So I think that's a very important point for everyone, right? Like when they're planning their adoption, thinking about, okay, like, do I do that? Not just with Notion, right, but with pretty much any tool out there.
Yeah, completely. I remember when in that role I was talking about earlier, when I was working in the IBM ecosystem, the owner of the company that I was working for, in one of my first interactions with him, he said something that I have sworn by ever since, and I think it's completely true. He said, software is easy and people are hard. Software does what you tell it to do. People don't. And that's where I think like I see it happening. Like that is a well-known, well-established truth. Yet I see so many implementations where all the time is spent on the software and we rush the people part. The people part is so important. Human beings are beautiful, complicated, nuanced things. And people do not like change, and we need to make sure that change is easy for them and that there's benefit to it, and that's where it works well. I completely think you and I are very aligned, and you probably are living that same experience as a consultant all the time.
Yes. Oh yes. The change management is the hard part, right? Like there are a lot of there's so many people who can just build Notion, right? Like it's a technical skill, but like it's not that hard to learn. The big challenge is then like taking those technical skills, understanding what the other person needs, building that, and then helping them adopt that. And also if they don't want to adopt that, I like being able to change the plan and the system so that it works for the person. Because if you build a system and the person doesn't use it, it's probably not the person's fault, not necessarily, right? It's probably your fault with either the system or the implementation along the way.
Completely.
Speaking of like all these people using Notions, do you when you encounter so many different types of people using Notion or bringing Notion into the companies, I'm just curious, are there any like archetypes or like typical people that you encounter along the way where like and I'm asking like also like from this perspective what you just mentioned, right? So if like someone who wants to roll out Notion to their company is like, okay, but like how do I find these champions, right? Like are there any tips and tricks to discover them? Like they share some common themes?
The tips and tricks to discover them, if you can figure that out, please let me know. But definitely some common themes, right? They are people who are curious, and that is regardless of level. I'm currently working with people who are in entry-level analyst roles, right up to CTOs of some of Europe's biggest companies. And the commonality across all of them is that they are curious. When I started at Notion, project management was a new world to me. So I did a course in project management to learn. And in the very first class, the lecturer kind of put up this challenging slide where he said that you cannot improve something without changing it. And I find that the people who gravitate to Notion, who want to bring in Notion, are people who live with that kind of philosophy, that they see the only way to get better is by being curious, by changing, by experimentation. They're the ones who bring in Notion. Trying to find them is the hard part. But what we tend to see is those people will bring it in, and they're usually builders. And in the successful implementations, they're also influential. And I don't mean influential being that they have a very lofty title. It could be that they're just really good at their job. And we've all been surrounded by somebody who's really good at their job, and you're like, how do you do it? Can I buy you a coffee and figure out like what it is that makes you? And they should, and that's influence, right? Or it's the high performer. It's the person who's maybe been there for a while and kind of has a bit of nous and all that kind of stuff. So influence is kind of packaged up in different ways. But if you can kind of capture somebody who is curious, is a builder, and is influential, that's Goldilocks. That's absolutely perfect. And then we can work with them to try and have them realize that goal. Improvement. And that comes about through change. So a bit of a long-winded answer, but if I wish there was like a LinkedIn filter for that, so you just find that individual. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist. And then obviously, like, there are certain types of roles that tend to gravitate towards Notion. You mentioned that it can be. I find Notion is funny because it can be as technical as you want it to be, and quite technical people tend to gravitate towards Notion. So we see a lot of people, like, for instance, developers using Notion, either individually or as teams. But also I think roles that tend to work with a lot of documentation and roles that tend to work very cross-functionally find Notion. So I find like marketing teams, so people who work in like marketing agencies, where they might be working with, it's so easy to share documentation in Notion across the walls of your company. And that's something that's super powerful for a marketing agency. They work incredibly cross-functionally. They have strict deadlines. They have tons and tons of documentation, lots of different approval workflows. And it's almost different for every client. Notion was like, it's as if Notion was designed for them. We tend to find that it's often technical roles, but not restricted to technical roles. People who it's almost people who have the people that software has forgotten and need to build their own tool. And that's
and the kind of people that that get annoyed by things if they don't work smoothly. That's like that's at least like also like how I got into it. It's just like I'm a very impatient person, and if I have to do like 10 clicks where I think like one click should be enough, it's like come on, like I open up a tool and it looks like like a Windows 98 interface, which is very common in my background of like legal software. It's like can't work with that. Sorry, need something that does a better job and is much smoother. So I think that in the combination of the Venn diagram that you share, that's like probably where you find most of the
absolutely
adopters. Yeah, speaking of like the marketing ones and like these different use cases, what would you say like in your day-to-day life, right? When you go to customers and you build solutions for them, what are kind of the most typical workflows that you develop for customers, and where you would also say, okay, like these are like very easy wins if you as a company want to go and adopt Notion?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I was saying in the beginning around your structured data and your unstructured data. And if you think of a lot of companies right now, they'll probably have a legacy tool that they use for something. They mightn't have a legacy tool. It might be Excel, but they probably have something that they use for project management. And those projects hopefully are tied to company goals. And then they have their day-to-day work. So, you have all the meetings that you have every day that are either individual with the team, and you have these blocks of work where you've carved out time to get things done. And that's all over the place. So as an employee, I often don't feel connection to our company goals, even though the thing that I'm working on is related to a task, that's related to a project, that's related to an objective of our company. I often don't see my work valued in any way. putting in a system in Notion, and it's really easy to do. It can be overcomplicated, but really the 60-70% lift at the beginning to just do this step of having an individual's work connected to team tasks, connected to department projects, connected to company objectives is the most transformative thing that you can do in Notion for a company. After that, there's all the amazing things that you can do to improve your individual productivity and your team's productivity and your company's productivity. But if you build that foundation right, and that's where I spend so much time, because so many companies do not have that structure in place. That will be the thing that I would say, like, there are like obviously like cool like specific use cases that we do. Like we're working at the moment with a music label and building out how they're interacting between the artists' album releases and concerts and the people who work for the music label. That's really cool and it's really fun, and you get to test Notion in different ways. Yeah, but I suppose the unglamorous side of it is like a lot of it is companies that aren't structured. I don't have an optimum structure. I'm putting that optimum structure in place because I can tell you as an individual, the feeling, if you feel like you are part of something and you're impacting your company in a huge way, what you're working on directly impacts the objective of your company. You're going to work a lot harder. You're going to take a lot more pride in your work. It's truly transformative for you as an individual. And Notion offers that in a way that I don't know any other software can or does.
That's true. Like it can create a lot of visibility and meaning, and it's a very simple change, right? Like all these elements exist already in the company, probably, hopefully. If not, then that's the first part to start. But a lot of times, right, like you have this planning element in your company, and then you have this execution layer, and they just don't talk to each other, right? Like they happen separately. It's different people who do A and who do B, and then like both people talk to each other and are like, like, why did you do this plan? Why did you not do this task? And everyone's like, well, I didn't know, right? I didn't see. And it's like these little tweaks, right? Like you get so much more traction on all the things, and you make sure really that like all this like collective energy, right? You have good people in your company. So the goal of Notion and any of this system is, right, it's just like get out of the way and make sure that like every person can do the work that they actually should do every day, and not have to be bogged down with like admin tasks, like copy like like my favorite new sayings, like life's too short to copy paste, right? No one should have to copy paste information from one thing to another, or like update things in 3 places because the tools don't talk to each other. And just having this like smooth line from like the top to the bottom, it's like it's so easy, but like it's simple. No, it's simple. It's not easy.
Yes, exactly. It's simple. It's not easy. I love that. Yeah, Francesca in my team, who I think you've met before as well, she talks all the time that everybody is a project manager, and that makes your life filled with admin, your working life. Notion makes that easier. It allows you to actually just focus on being productive and not focus on, like you say, copy paste. So I love how you phrase that.
Yeah. Well, it's there's a lot of fun things that you can do in Notion to make your life easier there for sure.
Yes.
But let's also maybe go back to one thing that we talked about in the beginning, and that is like this typical scenario, right, where people they start with something in Notion and it feels good in the moment, and then later down the line, right, like a few months later, with like a few more teams in the loop, they realize, oh shoot, this isn't serving us anymore. What would you say to people who might be afraid of starting Notion now, right? Like maybe a smaller company that is not like an enterprise client, or like that doesn't have a huge budget for an implementation, and is like worried that if they get it wrong now, right, it might hurt them later down the line. Do you have anything there where you would say,
firstly, that's like a very normal and very real concern to have, and I'd almost be I would be surprised if customers didn't have that concern, because if they did, I would almost say they're being naive, because you're bringing something in to change the way you do things, and the reason you would do it is very obvious. There is huge benefit, but there is also the risk that this doesn't work, that the person who brought it in looks a bit silly, and that you spend all this money, and that is whether you're buying Notion or you're buying Salesforce or you're buying a new facility. or moving to a new office, all of these things are the same for a company, right? And I think the most important thing that you can do in that situation is due diligence, right? So speak to us, understand what that process looks like, understand the professionals that we have in our team that make that job really easy for you. Speak to our other customers, speak to the amazing Notion community, like consultants like yourself, people who are spending every single day de-risking this process for companies. I go back to what I said in a little bit earlier around the only way that you can get improvement is by change. You cannot improve by doing the same thing the same way. You maybe can drive efficiency, but you're not going to improve anything. So if a company fundamentally needs to change, then yes, like you have to do it. What I would say is it is very good that you are thinking about the risks, and we want to work with you to be risk averse, and we want to do it in the safest way possible that works for your business. And that can go from the macro rollout right down to the minutiae of like, when are we going to do imports? When are we going to do enablements? How many departments are we going to roll out first? Like, obviously, we would love for you to roll out wall to wall, but we know that doesn't make sense sometimes. So we'll start with these departments because they're working on this project, and we want to make sure that's super successful. So yeah, we have tons of different ways of making sure that that process is done correctly. But I would never be concerned if a company is showing concern. I think that's a really healthy thing. And you know, like, I'm sure you see it all the time. I don't know if your role or my role exists if companies don't have concern, because they'll just do it themselves and they get it wrong or they don't. But hey, it's companies that take things seriously that mean that, you know, our ecosystem exists, and that we get to work together and work with them.
Yeah, that's true. And it always depends a bit on the individual situation, right? Like in some companies you have like a lot more leeway, right? Like to experiment and to get things wrong and to try over again, right? And it's like you can tinker yourself, right? Like you keep things in-house, particularly if you're like, you know, like an early stage startup or so, you probably don't have like the resource, but you have also like the freedom, right? To get things wrong, like adapt quickly. And in other situations, right, like might be better to get out set up, right? Like just shorten the adoption curve and the time it takes you to figure these things out, because other people have made a lot of mistakes for you, so you can learn from them and get it right a bit quicker. And then the other thing is always, right, like the what I also sometimes try to illustrate is if you're at this point, right, where you're looking for a solution, then clearly not everything is running perfect in your company, right? If you're super happy with how your processes are and like everyone is just like coming to work like, oh, this is a dream, chances are you're not looking to, you know, change things up much. So like like not doing something, not trying to fix it, it's like it's the devil, you know, but it's also like there is just accumulating costs, right? Like the chaos in your system, it just gets larger, right? Like the amount of documents that you lose and like legacy tools will just like keep growing. So it's always a balance of like the unknown risks and the risks that you learn to live with every day.
Yeah, completely agree.
Yeah. Speaking of the, like some things that don't run so smoothly, I would love to know, like Notion internally using Notion. Are there, any workflows or any challenges, that you already experienced in your time at Notion, where like a workflow wasn't like optimal, and then you used Notion to solve something like that? Is there, maybe a story that you can share there with us?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So not to give away too many internal secrets, but maybe to kind of tell a little story. So when I started, I was the first solution engineer in Dublin. We already had Marshall and Massey, who were working in New York and Tokyo, respectively. And I built out a team. So I've got an amazing team here now, Brendan and Francesca, and we're expanding that team at the moment. And I set us a little goal a couple of months ago. So I wanted us to be the best team in Notion EMEA at using Notion. Seems like a pretty normal thing for a team in our position to want. But what we decided to do was like look at our processes and how we worked as the three of us, how we worked with our cross-functional stakeholders, and kind of, right, how do we optimize everything that we're doing in Notion? Like, we're doing a lot right now in Slack. We're doing a lot right now in Google Drive. And that is because of our biases from where we've worked before. and we have this amazing tool, and we're not challenging ourselves to use it for everything. So that was probably that was like a little kind of light bulb moment for us as a team, and we decided to just kind of go and completely rip up our team space and rebuild it, and start using our own, in some cases champagne, and in some cases dog food, and when it's like trying to find it, like, because we need to stand over this to our customers, and we need to be able to like advocate for these things. And I find if you have a personal use case that you're passionate about, you are so much more convincing, because you actually truly believe it and you truly care. So we looked at, all right, well, we work, as I say, with salespeople all the time. How do salespeople request us? What are the bottlenecks that we have when salespeople request us? So we previously had Slack channels, and they would post about the customer or prospect that they wanted us to work with. And it would usually involve us going back and asking like 5 or 6 questions. And we use a CRM in here, so we would probably check Salesforce as well. And it was kind of clunky in that they had a request, and by the time we accepted or declined the request, it might be 2 days of back and forth. So we said, all right, let's design a workflow in Notion. So we are capturing all the information that we need to capture. We're doing it in a really programmatic way. And then we're building a workflow or an automation in that database so that it's going to notify us in Slack. We can have an internal private conversation, just the 3 of us, about how we want to work with that. And then get back to accepting it with another button inside the database that then sends a message back to the sales rep. What we've done is we've been able to take something that was a pain, take something that was sitting in multiple products, put it in a single place.
Yeah,
mean that we can have a private conversation as a team, make the best decision for the customer and for the salesperson, and get back to them as quickly as possible. So we're able to get back to people quicker. There's less stress, there's less products, less mistakes. When you introduce more products, you introduce more complexity, you introduce mistakes, less mistakes. Yeah. And we don't want to make mistakes for our customers. So that just little thing that we do now has just smoothed everything out for us. And we do that with lots of things. And that was a big step for us, was just even philosophically thinking, we're going to be the best at using Notion in our company, and challenging ourselves to use it in a really interesting and fun and useful way. I won't speak for any other teams that might be doing things better or worse than us. I will shout out in particular, though, Anya, who's our head of international marketing. Her team use Notion in a really, really cool way. And I don't know if we're neck and neck yet, but they were the ones that when we started this project, we were trying to catch up with.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Audio is amazing. I need to talk to her and ask her, okay, like what are her secrets of setting up that for?
Yeah, she would be an incredible guest.
Yeah. Well, I'll add it to the list. I already had asked her once whether she would be interested. So hopefully. But yeah, I think what I also what I really loved about your story right now is that I think it illustrates a very, very underrated point with Notion adoption, and that's the know your process part. And it's something very simple, but if you ask someone how do you actually work? How does your work look like? If you're first asking well, do you know how your work looks like? Well, everyone would answer, yes, of course, I do it every single day. But if you then challenge yourself to think to okay, what is actually every single step that has to happen for me to deliver my product to my customer? And it doesn't matter where you work in a company, right? You will always have at least an internal customer, an internal product that you're responsible for and that you have to deliver. And if you really think about all the single steps, all the single decisions that have to happen, and take the time to write them out and realize, oh, well, here's a bottleneck that is unnecessary. And this is actually the one key step that is the most relevant. So maybe when I build out my Notion system, this is what I might want to focus on first, rather than, setting all the icons and colors, which is very fun and rewarding. But if it's, the 80-20 of this impacts your work every single day versus this is a nice to have, then maybe there's a good part. And just knowing again, right, what your process is this huge unlock, which will make everything in your work, and in particular when building Notion, so much easier.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. A beautiful Notion page that doesn't help is useless. And I would much rather something simple that is impactful. I have them right here on my desk, sticky notes. I'm a huge fan of the humble sticky note. I think this is something that project managers are very good at, that I'm a skill that I'm learning.
I have only the yellow ones.
Yeah.
Same.
But what I'll always do, if I have something, like if I have a goal, just get a Sharpie or a pen and a sticky note and just start putting, how do I get here? What are all the steps that I need to do? And think of them as steps, not tools. Too often, like I was saying in the beginning, people will think of, okay, so I need to do this in Jira, and I need to do this in GitHub, and I need to do this in Slack, and this in email. And you're actually not thinking about the steps now, you're thinking about tools.
Yeah.
Think about the steps. I need to create a project. I need to have a kickoff meeting. I need to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden now, I have a complete map of what I need to do, who are my stakeholders, when do I need to involve them. I have a really clear flow chart, and the humble sticky note can kind of unlock that for you. And that's only then can you start building. So that for me is just such a crucial thing. And regardless of if it's you wanting to change how you use Notion personally, or the largest enterprises in the world changing how they want to use Notion, or any tool for that matter, it's the best place to start.
Oh yes, I agree. Like it's a small habit change, or like it looks like only a small part, but if you rush that and then skip over it, you'll regret it later down the line.
Completely.
So your team wanted to be the best at using Notion internally. I'd be curious, what does Notion do to help, train their new joiners on how to use Notion? Right? Is there like a program in place? Is it like, you need to pass a certain exam before you get hired? How does that work?
Yeah, so for my team in particular, the bar is high, because your job is to talk to customers, to talk to our product team about Notion. So we hold a really high bar, both pre to hiring someone. Like, we expect you to be able to showcase some cool stuff in Notion to us in the interview process. But then also we will take you by the hand once you start and enable you. One of the first things I think, and like we were saying earlier, Notion is so tactile. I don't think that you can truly learn. Some people can. I learn differently. I'm a very tactile learner. I think the best way to learn Notion is building and getting in. So what we do is we set tasks for people. And the first thing that you do when you get here is you build. And this kind of stems from before, it feels like forever ago, before we had home in Notion. And you had to build your own personal OS to kind of navigate like all your tasks, all the pages that you use, all your notes, all that kind of stuff. And people can get really creative and complex. The worst thing that you can do is just download a template for that, because you skip the learning. And you skip figuring out how things work. So that is the most important step, is in the first week, build. Because if you don't build, if you just borrow, you'll never understand the thing. The thing that I always tell every new hire is that you only ever get one chance to be new. I would much rather somebody take 6 weeks to ramp up well than 4 weeks to ramp up poorly. Because they're going to be here for a long time. They're going to be talking to lots and lots of people, and they need to know what they're talking about. So yes, we do like lots of like kind of smaller enablements and different things, and we have like one-on-ones and all that kind of stuff. But the most important stage is building early. You should never be afraid of Notion. And I think actually that's probably the thing that I would love to add is like, in everyone's first week, they're going to do something on a very public page that they probably shouldn't do. They'll add a block in, or they'll change a property or something like that. And the important thing to know as well is like that we always is like, you're new, that's okay. We can restore a page to a certain point. Like we can delete it. It's like nothing is permanent in Notion. And I think that's just getting that out of the way, that there's no, because the last thing you want is people to be fearful of a tool or using a tool in a certain way. Yes, there are rules. There are things that we should all do in here, but you should feel the psychological safety to use this tool to its maximum. And I think that's like almost like a rite of passage that you have to go through. You have to mess up something. You have to add like something to the global projects database or something like that that isn't meant to be there. That's totally fine. Somebody's going to go in and they're going to fix it, and they're going to let you know that it's totally okay, and here's what you should do next time. That's, I think, the collective responsibility in onboarding is so important. Just to let everybody know, like, this is what you did. It's probably not the right thing to do. That's totally okay. Here's what you should do next time. And having a positive attitude about that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I love that. I love the build not borrow part in particular.
Huge.
I think that is so important. Like I have like a hate-love relationships with the Notion templates. I think they're like a super good thing to have, but I think like most people just use them wrong, right? Like you need to use them as inspiration. You need to use them to look at it, see like, okay, this is like what other people do, and then you can go in and like try to decipher, okay, and this is how it works, and then you can do it yourself. But expecting, like with this box of Lego, that if someone else builds you like this Lego piece, in particular if it's a complex Lego piece, that it somehow randomly fits how you want to work, rather unlikely, and you lose so much opportunity on figuring something out.
Completely. I think if you ask yourself, like, what is the goal of you learning Notion? It's you want to understand the dynamics of how things work. If you just like, hey, I need this thing for a meal plan, I don't need to know how it works. Yeah, our community have built amazing templates for exactly that. If you're like, I want to be able to talk to people about this thing, then you need to get to the level that our amazing community are at building templates. You need to like understand how that stuff works. And I think that's probably the difference in you have the people who want to use this and the people who want to understand it. And if you come into Notion to work, you want to understand it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now we're coming up to the hour, so maybe to be respectful of your time, right, and to wrap things up. Even though I could like keep going for another 2-3 hours to just talk about this. Maybe just one last question, and that would be sort of like if you could ask everyone or encourage everyone that uses Notion to follow one specific best practice, or do one specific thing, what would that one be?
There's lots that I would love to say here, but if I could just encourage every team to do one thing, is at the top of so regardless of what your team does, at the top of your team space, build some buttons. And those buttons should be your most used things. So if you want to create a new project or create new meeting notes or add a task to a project or whatever it is, build buttons that are connected into your databases down below. Because what that will do is it's going to create the right behaviors and the right paths for people. So instead of somebody just creating a new page when they want to start a new project, or creating a page in private when they want to have some meeting notes or some minutes for a team, what you're actually doing is creating them, hopefully with a really clean template that's, means that you're working at the same methodology for the entire business and capturing things in the right way. But now they're also all being stored in the right place. And that is going to, in a way that you can't imagine yet, supercharge your team. That is my one piece of advice, is buttons are the most powerful and underused. I know you might argue formulas, but I'm going to make the argument for buttons. Buttons are the most underused and most powerful thing in Notion. Pick your team databases for notes, for projects, for tasks. Create 3 buttons for them at the top of your team page. Quick links, and it will make everyone in your team's life easier, and you're all going to get to benefit from the collective brain of that team. So if you could do that today, you'll have a more powerful team tomorrow.
Yeah, amazing. I agree, and I would also say like I would use buttons before formulas. I think they are the bigger lift. Like the formulas are really nice. They are really fun. They can do some really, really cool stuff, but that's like in the 80-20, that's the 20. Right, like that will get your Notion workspace to the next level, to like that end zone. But there's so many quick wins and low hanging fruits on the way there. And particularly when it comes to designing UI that encourages smart choices and the right user behavior, right, without again like reducing clicks. Big fan of that. Not having to look at a lot of different places. Amazing. Yeah. Well. Perfect. Thank you so much for this. This was an absolutely amazing conversation. Learned so much. That was super, super cool to get some insights into, what a solution engineer does at Notion and how Notion thinks about, solving these problems for customers. So, thank you so much for coming on today.
My pleasure, Matthias. It's so fortunate that we get to work with people like you at Notion, and I'm very grateful to get to spend an hour in your company today.
Yeah, well, hopefully soon again. And until then, have a good time.
Thank you.
So much for my interview with Ciarán. If this got you interested in using Notion for your business, but you don't quite know where to start, don't worry. Here is a complete Notion for Business setup guide. Everything you need to know to go from a blank page to a fully operating system. Just click here and I will see you in a second.